Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are getting ready to have our wonderful industry presentation. This is an exciting time for PWS clinical trials, and this session will provide insight into some of the companies and the work they are doing in PWS research, and an opportunity to better understand the trials that are taking place. I'm pleased to introduce to you our following presenters for this afternoon's session. We have Dr. Jeff Dano, Chief Medical Officer, Harmony Biosciences, Sarah Cotter, CEO of Levo Therapeutics, Dr. Liz Messersmith, Senior Vice President and Head of Orphan Business Group, Radius, Paul Pereira, Vice President, Patient Advocacy, Saniona, and Anish Bhatnagar, CEO of Soleno Therapeutics. Dr. Dano, I will turn it over to you to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. And let me bring up my my slides. Thank you very much, Paige. And on behalf of the team at Harmony Biosciences, we appreciate the opportunity to share our excitement and progress on our phase 2 study with the Prader Willi community, showing the effect of pitolisant, the safety and efficacy of pitolisant in patients with Prader Willi syndrome. So first, a little bit about who we are. Recognizing that Harmony is one of the newer pharmaceutical companies working with the Prader Willi community. We are a pharmaceutical company headquartered outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're dedicated to developing and commercializing innovative therapies for patients living with rare neurological disorders who have unmet medical needs. We were started in 2017 when we licensed the US rights to a product called pitolisant from our French partner, Bioprojet. We became a public company last August, and now we're a fully integrated pharmaceutical company with about 160 employees. So next, a little bit of background on pitolisant, what it is and how it works. So this is a first-in-class medication with a novel mechanism of action, and it works by interacting with what's called the histamine 3 receptor. And histamine it works by increasing histamine levels in the brain. And histamine is a major wake-promoting neurotransmitter that helps to stabilize states of sleep and wakefulness. Pitolisant was approved as WAKIX in Europe in March of 2016 for the treatment of narcolepsy in adults with or without cataplexy. And then it was approved in the US in 2019 for the treatment of excessive daytime sleepiness in adult patients with narcolepsy. This represented the first and only product approved by the FDA for patients with narcolepsy that is not scheduled as a controlled substance by the DEA. Pitolisant was then approved for the treatment of cataplexy last October. And a couple of the safety features, patients who have severe liver disease, it's contraindicated because pitolisant is metabolized through the liver. And common side effects from the clinical trials included headache, insomnia, nausea, and anxiety in a range of 5 to 6%, and headache at about 13%. So now for some background on our phase 2 trial. And this will evaluate the safety and effectiveness of pitolisant in patients with Prader Willi syndrome, ages 6 to 65. And who experience excessive daytime sleepiness and other symptoms of Prader Willi syndrome. So we understand that hyperphagia is one of the main symptoms in patients with Prader Willi syndrome. There's been a lot of attention and focus, on that lately. But just to share in terms of the rationale why we're studying pitolisant is because right near the hunger satiety center in the brain, in the hypothalamus, is the sleep-wake switch in the brain that controls states of sleep and wakefulness. And this is another area of dysfunction in people living with Prader Willi syndrome. And many patients with Prader Willi experience excessive daytime sleepiness. And this symptom can also have an impact on other key features of people living with Prader Willi, including behavior, cognitive function, learning abilities, and even some of the disorders, related to eating behaviors. So with that, this study will assess the safety of pitolisant, its effectiveness on excessive daytime sleepiness, how pitolisant affects behavior, learning, and other sort of aspects of cognition. The effect on caregivers, obviously a very important aspect of patients with Prader Willi and impact on caregivers and families, and also an exploratory endpoint around hyperphagia and effect on hunger. Following the double-blind portion of the study, patients will be eligible for an open-label extension where all patients will receive pitolisant during the open-label extension phase. We're planning to study approximately 60 patients at 10 to 15 clinical sites around the country. This slide just shows some of the clinical trial sites in our phase 2 trial. There are currently 10 sites that are active, and more sites are being added for this phase 2 trial. All travel expenses to the site that's most convenient for families with Prader Willi will be reimbursed by Harmony Biosciences. To learn more, you see the address there, clinical trials at harmonybiosciences.com, to learn and get more information about this phase 2 trial. So next, a short video which will share some more information on our phase 2 trial.
If you or someone you love has Prader-Willi syndrome, you may be interested in a clinical trial open to people with PWS who are between the ages of 6 and 65. This trial will study the safety and effectiveness of an investigational medication and its impact on excessive daytime sleepiness, behavioral symptoms, and cognitive function. Clinics across the United States are currently enrolling participants, with more sites being added, and travel expenses to the clinic most convenient to you will be paid for by Harmony Biosciences. So, what's involved? Well, that depends on whether you are the person with PWS or the caregiver. If you plan to participate, there will be 5 scheduled visits over the course of about 4 months. And if you're a caregiver, you'll accompany the person with PWS to each of the visits. For caregivers, your support and participation will be important. For example, the first visit involves an initial screening and the start of a 2-week sleep diary. Making sure the diary is kept up to date will be the responsibility of the caregiver. The second visit includes nighttime and daytime sleep tests to confirm that the person with PWS is eligible for the trial. If eligible, the person with PWS will start taking their assigned study drug once daily in the morning after waking up. This could be the investigational medication or placebo. The dose will be kept in a diary, updated daily. Making sure the diary is kept up to date will be the responsibility of the caregiver. The next 2 visits are to assess how the person with PWS is progressing. At the last visit, the nighttime and daytime sleep tests will be given again, and then it's time to consider whether to continue into the long-term safety trial, where people with PWS will take the investigational medication and help researchers collect information. There will be no placebo during the long-term safety trial. Clinical trials are essential for the development of new treatments to potentially help people living with PWS. And every clinical trial starts with volunteers like you. To learn more about this trial, you can contact Harmony Biosciences at clinicaltrials@harmonybiosciences.com.
So that completes our presentation. I want to thank you very much for your interest and for listening. My thanks also to PWSA USA for the opportunity to share this information with you. And Harmony, we're excited about this phase 2 study, and we're committed to investigating pitolisant in patients with Prader Willi syndrome. Thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Sarah Cotter.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so I'm Sarah Cotter. I'm the founder and CEO of Levo Therapeutics, and I'm also the parent of a child with PWS. She motivated me to start the company about 5 years ago with the mission to develop impactful therapies for our community. I'd like to start by telling you about our most advanced program, which is intranasal carbetocin, or LV-101. Its utility is rooted in studies that looked at brains from patients with PWS, and they found that those brains had a reduction in oxytocin-producing neurons. So oxytocin is a hormone that's produced in the brain, and it has a number of important functions that include control of appetite, social emotional behaviors, and anxiety. Our community has been interested in the role of oxytocin in PWS for a long time. And there's been a number of studies looking at it in PWS. Unfortunately, the results have been mixed, with higher doses being associated with some negative behaviors and temper tantrums. And that's thought perhaps to be due to off-target effects of oxytocin engaging with neighboring kind of similar receptors for the vasopressin hormone that's similar to oxytocin. So in contrast, carbetocin was developed to be really selective for its own receptor, the oxytocin receptor, to really limit those off-target vasopressin effects. And that allows you to dose the product higher than you otherwise could with oxytocin and hopefully avoid some of those negative behaviors. It also has a longer improved half-life, meaning that you can dose it fewer times a day and it has a longer duration of action. So there was a phase 2 study that was run all the way back in 2014 at the University of Florida, Vanderbilt, and Winthrop that was successful, that you can find on our website. And that study motivated us to get the rights to this program and study it in a phase 3 study that we call CARE-PWS. So before I tell you more about that study, for those of you on the line that participated in the study, we want to offer our heartfelt thanks for participating in the study. We know it's a huge commitment, and we're incredibly grateful for your participation. On the left is an image of a wall in our office where we would hang a butterfly, which was our logo for the study, each time a patient was enrolled. So thank you again. Here's a schematic of the study design. On the left, you can see that for the placebo-controlled period, which was 8 weeks in duration, we looked at 2 different doses of intranasal carbetocin versus placebo. And then there was a 56-week long-term follow-up period where all patients had access to drug, with half being on the 3.2 milligram dose and half being on the 9.6 milligram dose, with the dose still being blinded to everyone. After that, there's also an optional extension period, and I'm happy to report that all of our patients have now made it that far for those that stayed in this study. This slide shows the baseline demographics of the patients that enrolled in the study, and specifically in our primary analysis set, which is 119 patients. You can see that, especially for a study this size, these demographics were quite well balanced across gender, age, weight, BMI, subtype, and baseline scores. So we were really excited to see when the data read out that carbetocin reduced hyperphagia in CARE-PWS, similar to what we saw in the phase 2 study. So here you can see declines in the hyperphagia questionnaire HQCT. The gray bar is placebo, the orange bar is the 3.2 milligram dose, the blue bar is the 9.6 milligram dose, and the yellow bar is the all carbetocin or pooled doses. And you can see that the 3.2 milligram dose did outperform the higher 9.6 milligram dose. So it was that 9.6 milligram dose that was studied in phase 2. And unfortunately, because we had selected that dose as our primary endpoint, the study technically failed on the primary endpoint. However, in this table, you can see that there were trends towards improvement across virtually all the different domains that we measured. And in particular, there were significant findings across the vast majority of the instruments for the 3.2 milligram dose, most importantly, the hyperphagia questionnaire with a p-value of 0.016. We found this to be particularly impressive because we did have to cut the study short because of COVID. Here you can see our data from the long-term follow-up period looking at the hyperphagia questionnaire. Again, declines in scores reflect improvements in hyperphagia. Here, the red triangle represents the average baseline score. Because some patients were on placebo, we pick it back up over here at week 8, and you can see that there were continued declines that were then maintained across both dose groups, but that the 3.2 milligram dose did seem to continue to fare a bit better than the 9.6 milligram dose. These trends and improvements over time were also seen across the other measures that we looked at, including the SIBOX, which is an obsessive and compulsive scale, and PADQ, which is a scale that we developed with the community to look at anxiety and distress in PWS. From a safety standpoint, the results were quite reassuring, quite similar to the phase 2 experience, where there were minimal differences from placebo, maybe with the exception of nosebleeds and flushing. So now, in terms of next steps for LV-101, we're really excited to have 2 studies completed that demonstrate the safety and efficacy of intranasal carbetocin in addressing a range of PWS behaviors. We're continuing to support our CARE-PWS extension patients, all of whom are now on the 3.2 milligram dose. We'll continue to keep you apprised of our progress in interactions with regulatory authorities, and we are incredibly thankful for the community's support. So just real quick, LV-101 is the first of what we hope will be many innovations for our PWS community. We have multiple programs underway that focus on the underlying biology and genetics of the syndrome. And we do have collaborations with major universities listed here, and we can't wait to tell you more about these programs as they progress. So with that, I'll turn it over to Liz.
Thank you very much, Paige. And thank you, Sarah, for the handoff. My name is Liz Messer-Smith. I am the Senior Vice President of the Orphan Business Group at Radius Health. And this is actually our first opportunity to engage with the PWSA community. And we're very grateful for the opportunity to do so. So I want to thank you specifically for your time today to learn a little bit more about Radius and how Radius started to enter into our interest in the field of investigational therapies for Prader Willi syndrome. So we'll start with who is Radius. So Radius is a biotech pharma company based out of Boston, Massachusetts. We were actually founded in 2003 and we became public in 2014. We currently have about $1 billion in market cap and about $210 million in revenue. And our primary focus is developing innovative endocrine and metabolic therapeutics to help patients. Now, our revenue primarily stems from a product called Tymlos, which is an endocrine metabolic therapeutic that was developed by Radius to treat fractures in patients with osteoporosis. And this product is an injectable product that is currently on the market and approved for the treatment of osteoporosis for women. And we have ongoing studies to extend this product for its applicability in osteoporosis for men. And in addition, we have life cycle opportunities to move the product from a sub-Q form to a transdermal wearable patch form. And we are expanding our sales of the product across the globe for the abaloparatide product. We also have within our pipeline a product called Elastostrant, which is in its phase 3 portion. And we announced earlier this year that we partnered that product with the Menarini Group Elastostrant is a product that was developed for the treatment of estrogen receptor positive advanced breast cancer. And the Menarini group offers us the ability to advance that product in the oncology space. And they will take it on through its subsequent development cycle and hopefully subsequent commercialization. So this allows Radius to focus back more where we feel we have expertise, and that is in the space for endocrine. So an endocrine is certainly an area of therapeutic expertise that's probably very familiar to the community as you work with endocrinologists to help with the treatment and the care of the individuals with Prader Willi. So with this background, Radius was able to expand our endocrine expertise, and this led to the identification of the RAD11 asset. And we acquired this asset at the beginning of January of this year. And so RAD11 is the investigational synthetic cannabidiol compound, which is chemically identical to the botanical cannabidiol. It has been assessed in over 150 patients across multiple indications to date. And these numbers also include several patients from healthy volunteer studies. We have, for the product, already granted FDA orphan exclusivity and fast track status, which will help us to hopefully more quickly progress the development of this. And we have our patents in place for our company. But I think what you care about is what are really more the advantages of a synthetic formulation versus a botanical consideration. So because it is a chemical synthesis, it does not utilize any form of the cannabis plant. And through that synthetic process, what we're able to do is get yields with greater than 99% assay purity. And by definition, we exclude those psychoactive substances of THC, cannabinol, and dronabinol. So that's important for us. We also have a formulation that is without alcohol, and given the younger age of the population where this product may be applicable, we think that's probably an important consideration. So we utilize the standard regulatory and quality control requirements, and because it is synthetic, it allows us to have a scalable process to be able to meet any market needs and supply chain consistency. We utilize our partner, Benuvia Manufacturing, which has experience in working in this space of cannabinoid drugs, and they are already an FDA-approved cannabinoid manufacturer for a product called Simlos. The next one. So Prader Willi. So why did we choose Prader Willi? Number one, it was aligned to kind of our Radius science and clinical expertise with endocrinology. And through our review of the literature and what we were able to see from the previous sponsor, Insys, had developed in Prader Willi, we thought that it made sense from a mechanistic perspective that we would have a multifactorial action to be able to address a number of the key symptomologies that are so critical and have the unmet need for this population, those being the hyperphagia, body composition, and potentially anxiety as a readout. So in preparation over the last year, we've been working to prepare materials for the FDA as new sponsors of the program to inform them how we would want to proceed with clinical development of this product. During those assembly of the information, again, we were encouraged to see the data and the potential impact that we might have on hyperphagia. And I hope you are able to participate and learn from a presentation by that preliminary study that was conducted in a phase 2 study with 7 individuals with Prader Willi, 4 on active, 3 on placebo in a phase 2 study with about over 8 to 10 weeks of treatment that showed a nice reduction in the HQ-CT score of about a 6.5 scale. So we were encouraged by that, and that's what led us to say, okay, let's really investigate this and give this product a chance to see what it might be able to do and offer for your population.
Great. Hi, everyone. This is Paul Pereira, Vice President of Patient Advocacy at Saniona. And on behalf of all of our employees, we're thrilled to be part of the National Convention. And in fact, this is my very first PWSA USA National Convention. So today I'd like to share with you a little bit about Saniona, an introduction, talk about our upcoming phase 2B clinical trial for Testament and the work we do in patient advocacy. So who is Saniona? And it's actually 3 syllables, pronounced Saniona. We are a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company that focuses on discovering, developing, and ultimately delivering innovative treatments for rare disease patients. You may not have heard of us, but actually we've been in existence for more than 20 years. We have an incredible team of scientists who have built a library of over 20,000 ion channel compounds, which will fuel our rare disease research efforts. We have a mid and early stage pipeline that includes Testament, which I'll talk about in a moment. We're headquartered in Copenhagen, Denmark, and that's where our research facilities are. And we have a corporate office in Boston, Massachusetts, in Waltham, and we opened that about a year ago. We have less than 50 employees, but an interesting fact about Saniona is that most of our researchers are women. And pictured here are 2 of our incredible scientists, Aino and Giddy. So about our pipeline. So we're studying Testament for 2 indications, for Prader Willi syndrome and hypothalamic obesity. And we expect our phase 2B study to begin in the second half of this year. And our phase 1 study for SAN 711 for rare neuropathic disorders will begin in the first half of this year. And in the first half of 2022, SAN 903 for rare inflammatory disorders will begin clinical trials. So what is Testament? Testament is a combination of tesofensine and metoprolol. Tesofensine is a triple monoamine reuptake inhibitor, and metoprolol is a beta blocker. Testament works in the reward center and appetite center, addressing increasing dopamine, increasing serotonin, and increasing noradrenaline to reduce cravings for food, reduce appetite, and increase metabolic fat burn. So ultimately, the goal is to address both hyperphagia and weight loss. So I mentioned that our phase 2B study will be opening in the second half of this year. Right now, we're in the process of recruiting physicians, principal investigators all over the world. This will be a global study. So what I can share with you today is that it will be a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled, multi-center trial. By double-blind, we mean that neither the volunteer nor the investigator at the site will know whether or not the volunteer is on Testament or placebo. And randomized, meaning that there'll be an equal chance of the volunteers to being assigned to either the placebo group or one of the 3 different Testament groups. One group will receive 0.125 milligrams, second 0.25, and the third, the highest dosage of Testament, 0.375, for a 4-month period. Following the 4 months, there will be an opportunity for all of the participants, even those that are on placebo, to roll over into a 9-month open label extension where they will all receive the highest tolerated dose of Testament. And I mentioned that it's a global study. So we have study sites planned in the US, Canada, the EU, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, and we're looking at even more countries. Just to talk a little bit about the work we do in patient advocacy. So I started with Saniona about 7 months ago, and our first order of business was to decide how we would work with patient communities. So we approached PWSA USA, we worked with PAGE, we worked with the International Prader Willi Syndrome Organization and FPWR. We listened, we gained insights, and we developed these guiding principles that are aligned with our company's core values. And there are 3. And the first is to put people first, to ensure that we're putting the voice of patients at the center of everything that we do at Saniona. The second is innovation with impact, trying to find creative ways to collaborate with the patient advocacy community. And last but certainly not least, it's integrity always. It's ensuring that we're operating at the highest level of ethics and integrity. So these are our guiding principles, and thanks to you, you helped us shape these, and it will be up to us to live these each and every day. And here's my last slide, and you'll probably recognize some of these beautiful, familiar faces here. So in the 7 months that I've been with Saniona, I've been on a listening tour. I've been meeting with families all over the world, and they've been sharing their insights. And those stories and those insights are shaping who we are as a company and how we are developing our medicines. If you're interested in sharing your story with us, if you're interested in sharing your insights, I'm here to listen. My email is here. It's paul.pereira@saniona.com, or you can reach out to me via our website or visit me in the virtual booth. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great convention and look forward to continuing this journey with you. And I'll now turn the floor over to Anish.
Thank you, Paul. Let me find my slides. Thank you all for listening this morning. My name is Anish Bhatnagar. I'm the CEO of Soleno Therapeutics. Soleno was formed about 4 years ago with the sole purpose of bringing DCCR to market for PWS. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area in a place called Redwood City, California, although our employees now are spread all over the country. So as some of you may know, we are working on a drug called DCCR, which is a once-a-day tablet for the treatment of PWS. It's been studied in many patients, more than 300 patients at this point, healthy volunteers, those with obesity, and about 120 patients with PWS. And the results have been interesting and have led us to work on a phase 3 program, which is nearing completion at this time. So how does DCCR work? The mechanism of action of DCCR and PWS is driven by the fact that DCCR targets a channel, a receptor, called the KATP, or the ATP-dependent potassium channel. So this channel is found in many different tissues in the body, and depending on the tissue, it can have a beneficial impact on PWS. So for example, the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that controls appetite. And there are certain neurons there, nerve cells, that secrete NPY, which increases appetite. Those nerve cells also contain this channel, and which happens to be dysregulated. So it appears that DCCR normalizes that dysregulation and therefore decreases the secretion of NPY. In fat cells in PWS, it appears to decrease the production of new fat as well as increase the metabolism of fat. And therefore, as you may have noted, in our data, we see a decrease in body fat. It's also present on pancreatic beta cells, and these are the cells that secrete insulin. So it significantly decreases the secretion of insulin, and that leads to several other metabolic improvements that are also seen in our data. So based on all of this, we started a phase 3 program in the summer of 2018. It's 2 studies, C601 or Destiny PWS, a multi-center randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study. And those who completed that study could roll into an open label extension study called 602. 602 is still ongoing. We screened about 181 patients to randomize 127 patients, which is an interesting illustration of how difficult it is from our end to do these studies. And we completely understand that from the end of the families and the caregivers, it's a different challenge because there's several visits involved and it's quite intense to get through these studies. So this 13-week double-blind study was completed by 120 patients. 115 of them rolled into the open label extension study, and about 100 of them are still being treated in the extension study. At this time, we're at approximately 3 years of running the study. So the patients who've been treated for the longest are approaching 3 years. The study was predominantly enrolled in the US, so 20 sites, 80% of the patients, and about 20% of the patients came from the UK. The data, I'll go only into a very high level of data here, but this is data you may have seen in the past. The top line analysis in the summer of last year showed that the primary endpoint, which was an improvement in hyperphagia, showed a trend towards improvement, but was not statistically significant. So what you're looking for is a p-value of less than 0.05. The impression of the clinicians, the investigators, showed a significant change, and the body fat based on an X-ray technique called DEXA also showed a significant improvement. As we all know, the pandemic has impacted the world in many ways, and particularly so for clinical trials. And when we analyze the data through March 1, which is more than 80% of the patients completing the study, we see that all the endpoints, the primary and the key secondaries, are less than 0.05. So going a little deeper into these data, this is the HQCT, the change from baseline in hyperphagia. And this is called a waterfall plot. So this is the change from baseline for every patient in the study in the March 1 analysis. So the dark green is DCCR, the light blue is placebo. The lower the bar, the bigger the response. So if you look at the right side, the right quarter of the slide, these are the biggest responders. As you can see, a vast majority of them are on DCCR and very few are on placebo. The caregiver's impression of whether the drug is improving the lives or not shows that about twice as many on DCCR thought there was an improvement compared to placebo, so 40 versus 20.8. The clinician's impression, which was the doctor based on their analysis of the patient, the data, talking to caregivers, etc., 40% believed improvement in DCCR compared to placebo being 6.7%, again, a p-value that was very significant. And finally, body fat, which is the other key secondary endpoint, showed a very significant improvement, the green one being DCCR, and the blue, which is the placebo patients, showing a small increase and a p-value, again, which was very significant. We were also evaluating behaviors, and this is done with a questionnaire called a PWS profile questionnaire, which was developed by Drs. Dykens and Roof. It tracks 6 behavioral domains in PWS, which are listed here. So aggression, anxiety, rigidity, compulsivity, depression, and disordered thinking. We see significant improvements in 5 of these and a trend in the other one. And these are more internalized type of behaviors. When you think about DBC2, which is a developmental behavioral checklist, looking at communications with others, we see a total score showing a very significant improvement, specifically the communication disturbance and social relating, also showing significant improvements. So when you think about the changes that we have seen with DCCR, they seem to span not just behavioral endpoint, but also metabolic endpoints, also changes in body fat, etc. It's important to think about safety, and in general, the safety profile of DCCR has been consistent with what's been expected of DCCR and what's been seen with the parent molecule. There's 3 adverse events to watch out for. One is hypertrichosis, which means changes or increases in body hair, peripheral edema or swelling, and hyperglycemia or increases in blood glucose levels. A vast majority of the events that were seen were grade 1, also called mild. In some patients, there is a dose reduction needed, perhaps for peripheral edema, sometimes for hyperglycemia. And in a very small number of cases, treatment may be needed. So for example, for peripheral edema, you might need a short course of diuretics, which was needed in 3 patients. And hyperglycemia, you might need to either reduce the dose or start patients on metformin, which is a drug which is commonly used for diabetes. In the study, 3 patients on DCCR and 1 on placebo needed new metformin treatments. As I said, most of these were mild and there were no serious unexpected adverse events. We've been working with the FDA for next steps, and we will certainly keep the community posted, but we are very appreciative of all the work that PWSA as well as FPWR have done for us. Right from the inception of the study, the conceptualization of the study, the enrollment in the study, and now the petition that was sent by the PWSA and FPWR to the FDA to request regulatory flexibility and request them to look at the data in more detail. Within a matter of days, this is a petition that was signed by more than 26,000 individuals, 97% of whom would like to see the option of DCCR being given. We are very appreciative of the support. And not only that, members of the community, Maggie and Katie in particular, moms in the PWS community, organize these town halls where families and participants in the 601 and 602 studies shared their experiences with DCCR. Others shared their experience with the PWS. And we shared what we thought were the appropriate next steps. So if you've not had a chance to listen to the town halls, the first one of these is available on YouTube. So we are in the process of discussing next steps with the FDA. We will certainly keep you posted on next steps. We appreciate all the work that has gone into it from the community side, from the side of the advocacy organizations, and we will continue to work with you all to bring DCCR to market. Thanks again for listening, and thanks also to Paige, Stacy, and the PWSA team for organizing this wonderful conference.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, Sarah, Liz, Paul, Anish. Thank you all so much for this presentation today. I think it's very informative, and we have about 15 minutes for questions. So there are several questions that we need to get to. One of them, I'm just going to go ahead and answer really quick. Somebody wants to know how they can learn more about clinical trials. And I would encourage you to visit each one of these companies' websites, as well as clinicaltrials.gov. And we will put that in the question and answer here as well. But getting to some of the questions asked, how does having an orphan drug status impact or benefit the PWS community? What other special exceptions are there that we can leverage? And I would just open that up to any of you who would like to answer.
Take a shot at it. So orphan designations are really meant to help companies develop drugs that otherwise perhaps may not be developed. So it contains a series of incentives that are provided to sponsor companies to encourage them to develop drugs. So for example, if we are working on a molecule that is not a new entity, there would not be patent protection. Orphan designation in the US would give marketing exclusivity or protection for 7 years. So that for companies is a big benefit. There are a number of other regulatory things that are beneficial. And again, these are more sponsor driven than advocacy driven. And those are things like fast track designations, priority review, breakthrough designations, pediatric rare disease vouchers. None of these really are driven by the advocacy community, but are more done by the sponsors.
Great, thank you. There's a question for Paul. Do all pharma companies have patient advocacy staff to help connect with families? And Paul, can you help families understand the role of patient advocacy in the clinical development process? What more can we do as parents to inform your process?
Great. Thanks for that question. Actually, not every company has a formal function that does it, but it's important for every company. And I think companies have patient advocacy in different ways. Sometimes it's folks on their clinical side would be the ones connecting with the community. And I think it's important to make sure that the patient voice is incorporated, because it helps companies better understand what's meaningful for patients, how to make them comfortable, and how to structure trials in ways that will make it worthwhile for families to participate.
Thank you.
Yeah, Paige, I would just like to add, I think that not every company does, but I think it's really important, especially in the orphan rare, space. So I am supported by a team of our patient advocacy team at Harmony Biosciences, as well as government affairs. And that video that we showed was actually put together by our patient advocacy team to try to sort of easily explain, how that phase 2 study is working. And that was actually a collaboration between our patient advocacy team and our clinical development group. So I think really, really important. And I just want to acknowledge, that I am supported, by that team at Harmony.
Wonderful, thank you. Anybody else on the panel want to talk to patient advocacy?
I mean, I think we recognize, at Radius, as we're starting on this journey, that our introductions into Prader Willi have actually gone at a much faster pace than I would have expected from a company starting on ground zero. And it is because these patient advocacy groups do exist, and that they are taking information and they're sharing information with, companies and industry sponsors that, may have an interest in this, and they're trying to make the decision of, hey, this looks like it might have an opportunity to be effective, are we going to be able to message and access the patients and tell them our story? So I think it's a win-win overall. And I think, the patient advocacy groups and reach out to the community is essential. I mean, we can't develop things without the input from the community. So.
Great, thank you. We definitely have a very active community that wants to be involved. So everybody is very interested in how, and there was another question around that. What is the best and most efficient and compelling way to engage in advocacy as parents and caregivers around advancement of treatments that are stalled at the FDA? Any thoughts about the best way?
That one.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. So look, I think compared to most rare disease groups, kind of to what Elizabeth was saying, we have amazing advocacy groups in PWSA and FPWR. So I think, the best thing you can do is stay aligned with them and follow their lead. They know how to interact productively with FDA, and really leave it to the pros.
Thank you. Another question, what do families most commonly misunderstand about the clinical trial process?
I can take a guess. I think one of the challenges is two challenges. One is how easy it might be to participate in a clinical trial. I think especially in these rare disease trials, when you're often needing to go to an investigative site, which is remote from where you live, you're taking a flight or you're driving several hours, that is a challenge. And especially in a situation like PWS, it should not be underestimated. That's one. The other is just the toll that it takes on the actual subjects as well, the actual patients as well. That's something that should be considered, because these trials are non-trivial. The FDA expects a lot in terms of data, and it's well worth understanding the trial very carefully, talking to the investigator in detail before enrolling for a trial. So I would encourage people to get very educated about the trials before they choose to participate.
Thank you.
I would just add on to Anisha's comments. Yeah, I think that I've worked in the rare disease or drug development space for the last 10 or 12 years. And I think from the patient and family perspective, it is appreciating, what that challenge is, as Anish, spoke to. I think it's the understanding of the challenge with regards to the sponsor role, the evidence, Anish mentioned the amount of evidence, the amount of data. So a lot of it is finding sort of the sponsor and patients and families and the patient community kind of working together to find the balance. A lot of it is sort of threading the needle between the challenges of conducting the trial and making it, as sort of palatable, if you will, for those participating, but also, meeting those regulatory standards. And we know that, that can be a moving target at times, but I think it's the balance of those factors that's important to understand.
Great.
Hey, Jeff, one more quick thing to add, just come up in the past, is that the misconception about, the end of a clinical trial, ultimately FDA approves a medication, but then essentially access to that medication doesn't necessarily happen from the day the FDA declares that a drug is safe, effective, and approved. It's just beginning, and I think that's a misconception of approval, directly meaning folks can have access to it that very same day. It's a whole other process that begins after that.
Could you expand on that just a bit, Paul? From a timing perspective, are you looking, 2 months, 6 months from approval to time that it's available? Does it vary? What does that look like?
It varies and it depends. I mean, there are some, based on insurance companies, payers' ability to make products available. If it's reimbursed by state Medicaid programs, oftentimes there's different policies and processes that the medication would have to go through to ultimately be approved by the state's Drug Utilization Review Board or P&T committee. Sometimes there's a moratorium period before any new medication would be made available. So it varies. And as you're getting closer to approval, it's important for folks to be to understand what their own payer's process is so that they're not disappointed when approval happens.
That's a great point. So more to think about past just approval. There's been a lot of presentations and information during this conference about COVID. And a question for those drug trials that are further along, how do you see COVID? Obviously, it hasn't ended yet. How do you see COVID continuing to impact the trials?
I think a lot of the data, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say,
Please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we all learned a great lesson as a result of COVID, and that is, as you even start to design a trial, you have to take that into consideration that it might happen again, right? So I think, the number of insight visits is critical. What things can be done remotely versus in office. I think everyone's taking a second look at all those clinical trial designs. So Anish, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. And also I think it's important to realize that trials that have more subjective endpoints are impacted more. So behavioral information, et cetera, which is critical in these PWS studies, can be impacted very significantly. And endpoints that are more objective might need scans and things like that need to be done at clinical sites. So I think it is going to be challenging for any sponsor to start a study at this time with very behavioral type of endpoints. And if they're more objective, then it's hard to have the contingency plan to figure out how you would bring patients in. So I guess I'm just underscoring the fact that this is likely to be challenging as we try to figure out whether this pandemic continues or comes back in a different way, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, the disruptions to routine that we all faced, including patients with PWS, definitely risk confounding the efficacy measures. So a lot of it, to Anisha's point, depends on what happens from here. If we've all fell into a new normal, maybe there is as great a risk. But if things continue to change and evolve, routines change, it could be hard.
Great, thank you. I love this next question. I hope this isn't too much of a crystal ball type question, but do you feel that there will be FDA approved medications to treat hyperphagia and other facets of PWS within the next 3 to 5 years? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Absolutely, there will be. There will be. There's so much work going on in PWS now, and it's not specific as to what we are doing, but I think there's so much good science in PWS. There's so much interest in PWS, and 3 to 5 years is a reasonable horizon. So I would say yes.
Okay.
Paige, could I just go back and say there was one thing I wanted to add about misconceptions or lack of awareness of from a patient on what does it mean to participate in a trial. I think another big thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is that for every participant that chooses to discontinue within a trial, their data is actually counted as a failure towards that endpoint, right? And when you're talking about trying to put in front of a review agency data that shows statistical significance, that failure really hurts, right? Because it was a discontinuation. So I think, I would encourage everyone to, fully understand their trial commitments and what it means to participate, work with their clinical sites to be able to make adjustments as they can, to be able to make those study, especially those critical study visits where that pivotal endpoint counts. The investigators, the sites, the sponsors, the community, that's what it's going to have to take to convince, the numbers. You need the numbers, and a negative really does almost count like triple against you for every patient in.
That's a great and interesting point. I think there are a lot of people maybe that don't understand that or didn't know that. But it does bring up a bigger question with our rare disease community being so small. How do we best handle these trials going forward? If we're going to continue to do more research and need more trial participants, what are your thoughts? I mean, there are only so many people in our community.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, right? People have to make their own choices on what they believe is the best opportunity and what the proposed investigational medication may treat. You know, you've heard today, people are focused certainly on a lot of things in hyperphagia, but we talked about behavioral endpoints as well as sleep endpoints. So I think they're within the realm of Prader Willi syndrome. You guys know it more than anyone. You know, these symptomologies range quite a bit. And it's unlikely, because it's multifactorial and because it's, genetic based, that there's going to be one medication that fits everybody well. So I think that will continue to, be decided as these trials continue to run. So while there may be a treatment, I don't know if, there's not necessarily going to be one fit solution for everybody.
Yeah, I think well said, Liz. And I think the other challenge, that's nothing new, is just activating the community. We talked about the challenges of participating in activating the community and making the choices of the good thing is there is a lot of activity in Prader Willi community and more and new sponsors coming in, looking at the different endpoints, the different symptomatology, and there is heterogeneity, which I think is important to keep in mind. The other just comment I want to make, we've talked a lot about statistical significance and those aspects of the trial. The other important thing is clinical relevance, and that it's sort of a bit of complexity, but it's another kind of aspect of looking at that and the numbers and everything we do technically in conducting clinical trials. But obviously, what is the importance of those findings? What's the impact to the patients, to the caregivers, to the family? So another important dimension to keep in mind.
I hate to say this because I think we could go on for another hour at least, but we are at time. And I just want to personally thank each of you and what you're doing to help our PWS community. We really appreciate you. We know it's a lot of work and a lot of time and effort is going into this, but we appreciate each of you. So thank you for being here today.